Hello, welcome to the show, Jennifer Clark. You are a voiceover actor here in Kansas City, but you are so much more than that. And so I'm going to start by having you introduce yourself to our listeners today.
Hi, Jess. Thank you for having me. Yeah, I play a lot of roles in life, but my favorite roles to play are wife, mom, volunteer, and voice actor. So
I love
I'm
it.
busy doing things that I love. I like to think of myself professionally as a storyteller. So I
Mhm.
do a lot of commercial work, corporate narration, e learning documentaries, and get to tell stories of all different lengths.
Yes. And for my listeners, I'll have you, this is how we met each other in this other world,
Yep.
in the space of advertising and marketing and all that. And so I guess knowing that we come from that same space, knowing the work you do there, I'm curious um, where your heart is and how you want to show up in your work and in your life um, for why you do what you do.
Hmm. Uh, that's a good question. One of my goals in the way I define success is to use my voice to contribute to the world in meaningful ways. So I do a lot of work that is, not incredibly meaningful. I'm selling a product or something like that, but I do get to work on projects that are very meaningful, that are bringing change. And using my voice in that way brings me incredible joy. I like to think of my work in storytelling because storytelling is how we learn best as humans. Our stories are so powerful and they're needed. Um, I think stories communicate our shared humanity. And
Mm,
when we hear someone else's story, really hear it, especially if it's someone that we have villainized because of our differences, then suddenly we start to identify with parts of their story. And then there is potential for empathy, um,
yes.
which I think empathy will change the world. It really will.
Yes.
So now
Yes.
that person that we have previously dismissed has value because we've heard their story. We start
Mm.
to really, really see them. So I look at my work as that is part of my goal is to help foster empathy in people.
Oh, I love that. And it's so powerful. And it's part of why I think we've clicked and worked well together too, is because, with the science of happiness and the work I do, it is very much about understanding that yes, we are humans on an individual level, but perhaps more importantly, we are humanity on this shared level.
Mm-hmm.
And how can we in this day and age lean into that and connect with one another and understand how we affect everyone around us and how our
Mm-hmm.
light spreads. And so I love that has always been your approach to what you're doing. I love that when we worked on your brand, whenever that was,
Which, okay,
that
let's
last
just
year, I know.
pause. You need some credit here. So for your listeners, I hired Jessica to brand my business, my voiceover business. And from the moment that we did kind of that initial interview, I was checking you out, like, I don't know if I want to hire her yet. Um, I walked away from that meeting knowing this is the person I want because we clicked. There were some really deep shared values, and I felt very seen by you and understood, even though we had talked for an hour.
Yeah.
So you did a marvelous job. So you all can check out her great work on my website.
Well, well, thank you for that. I love the value alignment, but I also love that what we did with your branding, and I know this isn't a branding podcast, we're not going to go into the depths of this,
Yeah.
but I do think it really sets up the conversation, even what you're saying here is the branding fell out of conversation. It
Yeah.
wasn't like we went off and had to create and conjure up this big brand narrative for who you were going to be in the voiceover
Exactly.
world. Like you are the brand, and it just naturally flowed out of that. So her whole brand is around the sound of human kindness, which is what she's sitting here talking about, right? Like it is about building empathy. It is about the storytelling.
Mm-hmm.
And so I guess I want to ask before we move into my favorite part of all of these conversations is why is this so needed
Hmm.
right now in this moment in time?
I mean, that's such a complicated
It is.
question with multiple answers. I think one part of that, one big part is that everything is so divisive and polarized. We can't have civil disagreements. We have completely lost the ability to say, I disagree with you, but I want to hear more. I still recognize you and your value. That hasn't diminished just because we have a disagreement. Um, I think we have completely lost our ability to do that. And and we have equated difference with evil.
Mm,
So
yeah.
anything, it could be minor or major differences, and all of a sudden you're on my villain list. You're on the wacky, you're crazy, um, you're bad. Uh, I think those three things are big contributors to where we're at right now as a society, at least in America.
Yeah.
Um, and and it really prohibits us from seeing each other, from sharing that human kindness, recognizing each other's intrinsic value. I think those are big stoppers.
So I'm going to ask you a fun part of that question now, which is the
Okay.
better part of that
Yeah.
question.
Let's dig ourselves
Uh,
out of that hole.
yes. What opportunities are there in this space?
Hmm.
Um, we see it a lot as challenges and the divisiveness and the honestly the hatred that is out there for whatever reasons. But with that, with the challenges come opportunities. And I think that's where you're trying to step in and build some different storylines there too, going back to the
Mm-hmm.
storytelling. So talk to me, share with my listeners what opportunities you're stepping into or see in this space.
Yeah. Well, I think the opportunities are endless. Um, I'm currently stepping into something kind of scary, a new opportunity. I'm starting a podcast called
Yay.
Humankindness at Work, launches January 20th. And this podcast is sharing inspiring stories. It's an interview style podcast, sharing inspiring stories of people just like you who are making a difference in their part of the world. And the goal is to hear how human kindness is at work around you and also hear how you can be a part of it and motivate listeners to action. Um, I think that most people want to make a difference. Most people want to do good in the world around them. They just don't know where to start. It seems overwhelming when we look at the problems in our society, in our world. They're enormous. And how do you take a bite out of that huge elephant? It just seems overwhelming. And so most of us are like, I can't change that. So I'm out,
Right.
and not in a mean way. It just feels overwhelming.
Yeah.
But when we look at change, making a difference, there are macro actions and there are micro actions. They all matter. But the ones that we have the most control over are those micro actions of change. And that can look like doing something nice for your neighbor. It could look like starting a nonprofit. It could look like voting. It
Yeah.
could look like, just reaching out to someone in need. My hope in this podcast is that people start to become aware of others. It is really easy, especially in our very busy American culture, to put our agenda above everything else. And I'm guilty of this. But
Same.
but if we could grow in awareness of really seeing the people around us, we will start to see the need and see how we fit into this big piece. We're all connected, and what you do affects me, and what I do affects you. Um, my hope is that we all, as a society, become more intentional, more aware, more empathetic, and more motivated to action. not just feeling that empathy, but acting on it in a compassionate way. So that's the hope for the podcast, and it's terrifying starting something new. I'll just say that.
I love it. And it is terrifying. So thank you for stepping into it, even though you're terrified. But you have, I'm sure no one has ever told you this, you have a really good voice for
Oh,
podcasting,
well, thanks.
Jennifer, you know. So it's interesting though, because when you're talking, I'm hearing this notion that I think we're all sold to culturally as kids here in America, at least, which is this idea of you have to go out and change the world. And
Mm,
we think of changing the world on this huge scale, like
yeah.
how do you eradicate poverty and how do you cure cancer? Like those are the things that were drilled into us, or at least into me
Mm-hmm.
as a kid. That's how you have an impact in the world. The reality is we all have an impact in our individual worlds. And that's how we should be trying to contribute and
Mm-hmm.
influence those immediate worlds, because when we're all doing that at the micro level, it changes the macro level.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Okay,
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more.
so I'm super excited about this podcast. One, because I am clearly in my own podcast a firm believer in the more we share these stories of
Yeah.
goodness, of people who are trying to have an impact and influence what our future can be together. The more people that do that, the more it becomes normal and people can see themselves do it. So I
Mm-hmm.
think it's super powerful. Okay, so this is my favorite part because I like to, figure out what our future can look like.
Yeah.
If we step into this call, if we see each other as humans and use human kindness in our interactions in the world, what does our world look like?
Mm. So much better.
That's usually the first thing people say. I love it. They
That's
really, but it,
that's the quick answer. I think our world looks more beautiful. I think one step toward that vision is growing an awareness of others, just beginning to notice people, you know, the cashier at the store and your neighbor or your coworker or your family that lives under your roof, like noticing them, being aware of who they are and what they need, and getting curious. Like, I think that curiosity is one of the antidotes for judgment. And it's something I've had to learn in my own life. Um, being curious, why did you make that decision? Why do you think that? Why do you believe that? And genuine curiosity, not curiosity that is, excuse me, not curiosity that is just waiting so that I can share what I think. Um, ask to hear their story, right? Especially if it's somebody who believes different than you, lives differently than you. Um, I'll share a little story with you. When we were doing the branding, one of the things, and I don't think I ever shared this with you, one
I
of the
hope it's a
things,
good story then.
one of the things that I kept thinking about during that branding process was a trip that I took during my junior year of college. And I lived in the country of Mali, which is in West Africa. Sahara Desert, Timbuktu is a real place. It was a culture shock,
Yeah.
to say the very least. Everything about this place was different than the culture that I grew up in. Um, the environment was different, the politics were different, the major religion was different, the way that women were treated and viewed was very different. Um, but that summer, that was the catalyst of this evolution of me realizing there is this common thread of humanity. And if I could humble myself enough to learn from someone very different than me, man, the things that I walked away from, the things I walked away with that summer
Yeah.
literally changed my life. you know, one of the things you experience when you spend a significant amount of time in a different culture is this comparison between your home culture and this new culture, whether you're living there or staying there for a long time. And you can start to despise this new culture and pick out the things that are, you know, bad or having a negative effect on the culture. And then you can also start to despise your own home culture and pick out things. So it was really important for me um, to weigh those really carefully and to come out of that with a very sober view, a sober perspective on my own culture and the areas that I needed to grow in. And then to see in this new culture, it was easy to pick out the things that I didn't like, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But that as I went through the summer, I realized, for instance, man, they know how to do community. Like I don't know how to do in America. We're so individualistic, and they did everything together. They were
Mhm.
there for each other. And, you know, I learned an intentionality there that I had never seen before. So spending more and more time with them helped me walk away with a value that I don't know that I would have received had I not done that experience. Um, where am I going with all this? that that was just a summer that changed my life, and I think if we don't all have to travel internationally or live in another culture, but if we could get curious about somebody else other than our little echo chamber of people that are exactly like us, if we could get curious and hear stories and really listen to stories, it
Mhm.
will expand our capacity for empathy and love, um, just in really beautiful ways. So when you ask, what does that world look like? That is my hope, is that there's a whole lot more
Yeah.
active love, that there's empathy, um, and genuine, genuinely holding other people with value. So
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
that's my dream.
I, yes. And it's interesting because it seems so easy. And right, like curiosity is one of the pillars of happiness. People who follow my work and know me, it's the easiest pillar for me. Curiosity has always been the easiest thing for me because I'm just naturally curious. And it is the antidote to judgment, which is really important. But also understanding that curiosity leads to compassion.
Mm-hmm.
It leads to empathy. It leads to understanding. It leads to authenticity. It leads to all of these other things that we need in order to show up as our best selves. And I love that you ended that story by saying people don't have to go and transplant themselves into the middle of another continent in a culture they don't know, because that is all around us,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
you know? And I think we do live in such a culture of judgment. Mostly, I think, because we live in spaces where we judge ourselves all the time. So we're so
Mm-hmm.
used to it that it's really easy to flip it around and judge other people. Um, but a world rooted in curiosity and compassion and purpose and all of those good things. I mean, who can say no to that?
Yeah.
Who can say no to that?
Yeah. I think one other thing that I would say, as far as like how do we make that vision a reality,
Mm-hmm.
other than curiosity, asking to hear people's stories, I would say put action to the nudges that you feel.
Yes.
I I'm a woman of faith, and I feel like God gives us those little nudges, that instinct of like, oh, there's that person, they need help, go help them, or whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think we get those nudges for a reason. And we are really good at shutting them down.
Yeah.
At least I am. I
Hmm.
don't have time for that. I have a billion excuses why I
Yeah.
should not follow that nudge. But I think back, I have 3 children. My middle daughter was 6 years old. And here in Kansas City, there's this place called the Plaza. And it's a big shopping center. And we were there one summer. It was really hot. And we're walking, and there are always several people begging or homeless people that are asking for help. And that day we had an agenda, and so I've got my family, we're booking it down the plaza, and my 6-year-old daughter sees this man sitting on the side of the street, and he's asking for help, asking for food. He has a sign asking for money. And she runs up to me and she's like, Mom, he needs our help. And I'm
Hmm.
like, oh, someone will help him, honey. And she said, Mom, it's really hot. He should probably have some water. I'm like, someone will help him, honey. It's okay. We got to get to whatever.
Yeah.
And she stops me and she said, we can help him. And she points at the water bottle that I have in my hand. I'm like,
Yeah.
guilty.
Mm.
And I just, it shocked me and stopped me right in my tracks. And I
Yeah.
said, you're right. And so I gave it to her and I walked with her and she went and gave it to this man. Now, that's a water bottle, right?
Yeah.
Did that change his life? No. But did it make any kind of difference in his day? Yeah, it did. And it made a difference in my daughter.
Yeah.
And, you could say, wow, you raised a great kid to be so empathetic and aware. Maybe, but I also purposefully walked past that guy and,
Yeah.
put my agenda before his needs. We all do
Yeah.
this.
Yeah.
But I think about her, how she saw him as a human.
Yes.
She empathized with his situation, and then she put action to that empathy. And she wouldn't take no for an answer. She didn't take my no for an answer. And I think if we all could develop that, where we listen to those nudges, that we don't become numb to them, and we get a little bit stubborn when people tell us, no, you can't make a difference,
Mhm.
I think we could change the world.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow, that's powerful. Because we all have done it.
Mm-hmm.
We all.
Many times.
And yes. Yes. I love that. I was gonna follow up and you shared that story, which was part of my follow-up, is what kind of things would we see in a world where we are curious and we are showing up in this empathetic state? And that is a very good example. And the takeaway for me is that future that we can completely design for ourselves and others is a future where we see one another's humanity first.
Mm-hmm.
And again, that seems so simple.
It is.
It is. It is, but it is also, um, it goes against so much of our social norms, and not even expectations, external expectations of output. And you have to be super efficient and you have to do all the things and you have to, and it's about us, the you, right? Me. I need all these things. And seeing another person for their full humanity right in front of you in that moment requires, as you called it, us to listen to our nudge. It requires us to step outside of us and ego and go, they're a human just like I'm a human.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know. I'm probably making assumptions about how that human got to where they are.
Absolutely.
But instead of getting curious and asking them their story, or just assuming it doesn't matter what their story is,
Yeah.
right? I like that vision of the world where humanity comes first, because because to me it's so natural,
Mm-hmm.
or it should be. Like it feels so like, yeah, of course, right?
Yeah.
So you've shared a little of how we get from here to there, of your roadmap from today to a world rooted in our shared humanity. Um, you're going to do that through your podcast, among many other things. Our listeners are hopefully going to be a little more curious and listen to those nudges. Is there any other, um, are there any other avenues or tools available to us to help get us from here to there?
Hmm. I mean, I'm sure there are tons. I'm sure there are tons.
Yeah,
Uh, I think those are probably the main ones that I have identified: the curiosity and
yeah,
empathy, intentionality, putting action to that
yeah,
compassion. Um, I think doing stuff like this, just listening to others, who are making a difference. I think that sometimes, and I think this is true of all of us, sometimes we can't see the vision for something better because we're
yeah,
just too deep in the trench.
yeah,
We're too deep in the trench. We can't find our way out. Um, and we need the dreamers. We need the people who are being vocal about change and inspiring us to make a difference. So, for your listeners who are those kind of people, the dreamers and the inspirational people, the visionaries, like keep going and keep talking about it. Um, we need you.
yeah, yeah. I was having a conversation last week about how we have collectively forgotten how to dream,
Mm,
women especially, um, because we have a lot of constraints on how we're supposed to show up and what we're supposed to
mm-hmm.
on big dreams, right? And I do think there are dreamers who have always been dreamers. There are dreamers who have finally stepped into their dreams. I think
Yeah.
I'm more in that category, right?
Same.
Like, and I think that's probably where most people are. Um, and then there are people who don't realize that they have a dream inside them. So
Yeah.
perhaps because we're not listening to the nudge,
Yeah.
or we're not giving ourselves the space. We're not being curious with ourselves, honestly,
Mm-hmm.
is a lot of it is what am I meant to do? What
Mm-hmm.
can I do? What do I want to do? And when I have conversations with people and you say, what do you want out of life? Right? Or what do you want for a job? And the most common response, and this very much goes into it, is, well, I know I don't want X, Y, and Z.
Mm,
What do you want in community? Well, I know I don't want X, Y, and Z. We don't spend a whole lot of time saying what is actually possible.
yeah.
And so I love that you're giving people permission to step into that and to listen to what's inside them already.
Yeah.
Um, so thank you, because that's really
Yeah.
important work.
Yeah.
Okay, if our listeners were to walk away and just do one thing to get us
Mm.
closer to seeing each other, to a world full of people seeing each other for their full humanity, what is one thing they could do today?
I would say identify someone in your everyday, whether it's a neighbor, a coworker, a family member, that is different than you, that you don't, you don't, maybe you don't, maybe you get along, but there's just some differences. They're not your best friend. You don't spend tons of time with them. They're not the person you would choose to go on a vacation with, okay? Identify that person and ask to hear their story.
Mm.
I think that you will find more in common with that person than you have differences. And that is the beginning of empathy. It's the beginning of human kindness. So identify that person, ask to hear their story, and really listen.
Yes, I love that. That's a great call to action. That's a great practice.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Well, thank you. Thank you for coming up. Thank you for doing the work you do. Thank you for, being the voice and the sound of human kindness, and celebrating those stories. I am super excited for your podcast, and because I know how important it is to share these stories.
Yeah.
Before we leave our listeners for today, is there anything else you want to say or share, or how can people find your podcast, or all of that good stuff?
Sure. My website is jennifersvoice.com and Jennifer's Voice across all socials. There's a podcast tab at jennifersvoice.com, so you can check it out. You can check out work if you need voiceover work. Happy to serve, but there's that podcast tab. Starts January 20th, and at this point, it'll be every other Monday releasing episodes. So I would love to have you join me.
Oh, I'm so excited. Thank you so, so much for coming on and sharing your story and your work with me and my listeners.
Thanks, Jess. It's been a pleasure.